Hi everyone, so hopefully you received the letter where you just got a little bit of information about the SRE lessons, the sexual relationship education lessons that we'll be teaching the Year 6 children. Now, this is just to give you a little bit more information, talk you through some of the things we cover, kind of what the lessons look like, and kind of some of the expectations that we have of the children, the ground rules, how questions work, and then basically let you know that if you have any further questions, you can get in touch with us to ask for more support or maybe see a few more of the resources, but also just kind of make you aware that there will be some things that we don't discuss with the children, and we'll be saying to them, look, we're just learning about this now. If you want more information on that, you should probably ask somebody at home that you live with and somebody that you trust. So I'll start showing you a little bit about what we're going to be doing. Now, this first page here, hopefully this isn't anything new to you. This is just part of what was on the letter that you've received, talking you through the lessons. Now, as part of just being at school, part of their normal PSHE lessons and their general development, all of the Year 6 children must learn about some of it. So the things that they all have to learn about are the physical and emotional changes that they'll go through during puberty, the external parts of the human body and their functions, and we make sure that we talk about the correct scientific names there, just so there's no confusion, so everybody's kind of knows exactly what we're talking about. The changes that a baby goes through to become a 10-year-old child, because obviously that's important for them as part of growing up. The basic stages of the human life cycle, what each part's called, how family units can look in different households, and each, especially nowadays, some households could look very different to others, and finally what makes a positive relationship. So those areas are something that every child in Year 6 will learn, and some of it we would have covered last year in Year 5 if we hadn't gone into lockdown, so that's why this is even more important this year. Now, there is also another part where if you choose to, then you can withdraw your child from these lessons. You would have to let us know if you would want to do that. If we don't hear from you, we assume that the children will be taking part in these lessons. So these lessons involve the children being taught how a baby is conceived and how they're born. And we also explain that sex should only be part of a loving, trusting, and caring relationships. So hopefully you've already seen all of that information because that was on the letter that you received. Now, one of the first things we say to all of the children is that we will have a question box in the room at all times. And this is because we don't want to put the children under any pressure. Often in some classrooms, we kind of have a routine where the teacher might just pick a child and ask them a question. We don't do that during SRE lessons. We'd never put a child on the spot and ask them a question, because obviously we know it can be uncomfortable for some of the children and they don't want to speak. So the idea behind a question box is if anybody's feeling a little bit nervous, they can write down a question that they're thinking of. It's anonymous, and then throughout the week it can be put in there. And when it gets to our SRE lessons on each day, the teacher can go into the box, have a little look. We might have done it beforehand, and then it might be that a lot of the same questions come up and it's really easy to cover. What we also have to say to the children is we will only be able to answer the questions if it's related for what we're covering. So, for example, we're teaching the children how babies are born, how babies are conceived. They might have some questions that kind of don't relate to what we're covering at the moment, and it might be something that they learn more about at high school, or it might be something that would be just saying to them, look, if you want to know more about that, speak about it at home, the people you live with and the people that you trust. So that question box is there all the time throughout the week, just so that if somebody thinks of a question outside of the lesson, they can pop it in. One thing also that's really important before we start every lesson is we have a set of expectations for the children, and we just share these each time. We also ask the children, once we've gone over the ones that we've come up with, if they have any of their own that they think are really important for us to add to it. So these are the ones that we share with them. First one kind of touched upon this already, but it's that no one, whether it's a pupil or a teacher, should ask anybody a personal question, and we wouldn't put anybody on the spot either. So that links to the second one. No one will be forced to take part in a discussion if they don't want to. All written questions remain anonymous. When they go in that question box, we'll not say whose name it is. We'll just read out the answer to the question. We also talk about pupils making sure we're going to tell them the scientific names and the correct names of the body parts, and we're going to keep encouraging them to use the correct names. So if they say, and maybe it's a name that they refer to a body part as at home, we would just back up what we're learning it to be. And finally, we'd make sure that we explain all of the words that we do talk about in a sensible and factual way, so that it's done maturely, the children all know what they mean, and hopefully they go away with a bit more clarity. Now, we also ask the children if they have anything else they think is important to add to there. And one thing that often comes up is that they all make sure they don't laugh at each other, they all speak sensibly and mature, and that we also get really, really often is that the children mention they know they should only be spoken about in the classroom, not on the playground, because they know that there'll be other children that they might see, or when they're walking around and when they're near their younger brothers or sisters. So that's always really good that they come up with that one. Now I'm just going to give you a little bit more information about what each lesson would actually look like. I've called them lesson 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and they might actually take a little bit longer than that, depending on how many questions the children have. So they might span across a few lessons, but this is the general guide to what we'll cover. Our first lesson would be on puberty, learning about the changes that occur, and whether it's a boy or a girl in the lesson, we all learn about the changes that both boys and girls go through during puberty, and speak about how it happens at different ages for children. Everybody's different, and it's completely normal, so that when children do start having these changes happen, as some of them already will have done, they're expecting it and it's not a shock, and they know that it happens to everybody. Our second lesson goes on to basically challenge and recognize gender stereotypes from the past, some that are still around in modern day about men and women, and explain to the children that as they grow up they become men and women, and it doesn't matter whether they are a man, whether they're a woman. There's no expectation for them to have to do a certain thing now as society develops and grows. Our third lesson goes on to speaking about building good relationships. Now, it starts off with really focusing on what's a good friendship. Okay, so if you know that these are aspects and features of a good friendship and a positive, healthy relationship in that respect, how does that also respond to maybe relationships you've got with your family at home? And then it moves on to a loving relationship with a partner too. As we move into lesson 4, that's where the children learn about how a baby is made, and we talk about, again, all the correct scientific names of the body parts. We'll have already spoken about them external, but we'll also talk about the internal body parts too, and make sure that they're aware that within these lessons, we always say that sex should only be part of a loving and trusting relationship. Lesson 5 then goes on to discussing and watching a video about how a baby is born. So we use, I'll show you some of the resources a little bit later and you can look into them yourselves if you like. We've used the Channel 4 DVD for years and years. It's all approved. And within that video, they actually see a baby being born at the end. So they also learn about how they develop throughout the pregnancy, and then they watch them be born. And then the final lesson is just about, once a baby is born, what's it like to be a parent? What are the roles and responsibilities of both the parents, and how do they support each other? Now, there are probably going to be lots of questions throughout those lessons, and it might be that something that we've planned for a later lesson appears in an earlier one. But if that's the case, we'd probably say to the children, okay, well, we're not learning about that today. That's to come up later, especially if for whatever reason there are some people who maybe aren't going to be involved in that lesson because of their parents' choices. Now, I've mentioned lots of the key vocabulary and the scientific vocabulary that we'll be talking about. I'm not going to go over all of it, but if I just show you on the screen here some of the key vocab that we'll be discussing with the children. Like I said, we know that they will have their own names for certain parts of their body when they're at home and as their views growing up, but as part of the national curriculum and what's been approved by Leeds City Council, we make sure that we all stick to the same scientific names, and these are what we'll be using with the children. So finally, just moving on, I mentioned a little bit earlier about this Channel 4 DVD. You might have heard of it before. It's called Living and Growing, and it goes alongside a scheme of work. Now, throughout the time in school, when they've done lessons on relationships and what it's like to grow up, the children will have watched these videos before, so they'll have kind of got to know some of the characters in them. Obviously, these guys missing the lessons in Year 5 will be watching those ones too, but that's kind of all it is really relates to what we'll be doing now. It's a bit of a recap on puberty, what it's like to grow up and develop. Then we also use this website, Betty Education. If you want to look that up online, you can do, bettyeducation.com. They're really good for helping children if they've got more questions about puberty, and they can tell them key facts too. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of an idea about what our lessons to do with SRE will look like at school over the next couple of weeks once we get them started. We really hope all of the children can be involved in them, and as I said before, there are certain parts that they all have to be. If for whatever reason you do wish to withdraw your child from one of the others, there's a slip on the bottom of the letter. Please let us know. If you want any more information about any of the resources we use, or you just have any questions for us as teachers, then of course get in touch with the school as well. Okay, thanks a lot for your time.